There's a generation that doesn't like being called by name. They were born right after the peak of the baby boomers and grew up before millennials and Gen Z took over the media. In developmental psychology, they were raised in what we call an attention gap. They didn't expect to be guided because, simply put, there was no one there to do it. They learned to stand on their own from very early on. For Gen X, independence wasn't a choice. It was a survival reflex, a necessary mechanism to exist in a world where adults were always too busy to pay attention to them. Do you remember coming home to an empty house? The Latchkey Kids. Those children who had to take care of themselves, their meals, their homework, while their parents were out working. They walked to school on their own. They played outside all day with no one watching. Gen X had privacy and freedom that no generation after them ever had. Psychology shows us two paths: prolonged anxiety or early independence. Most Gen X chose the second one because nobody regularly asked them, "Are you okay?" They learned to answer that question for themselves. They learned things as kids that many people still cannot do today. The result? A generation that complains less, shows emotion less, but is resilient in ways that astonish us. They are not tough, and they are not fragile. They're just used to the fact that no one is coming to rescue them. Unlike millennials who search for meaning or Gen Z who search for identity, Gen X searches for peace of mind. They watch their parents work themselves to exhaustion and still not feel secure when crises came. They learned something harsh early on: success that costs you everything is not worth it. For Gen X, work-life balance is not a trend everyone is chasing. It is a long-term defense mechanism, a way to protect their soul from the world's chaos. They didn't grow up in abundance. They know what enough means. They keep their expectations low so disappointment can't destroy them. Their belief is practical. You can work hard, but never let your job define your entire worth. Gen X grew up in a world without a how-to guide, no Google to ask, no GPS to show the way. They had to adapt fast. They didn't cling to rules because they were used to living through constant changes in technology and society. In psychology, this is a group with extremely high mental flexibility. They were taught, figure it out yourself. That's why they don't need an instruction manual for life. They can swing an axe and teach computer science. They can change a tire on a remote road and manage massive server networks. This is why they're often the quiet leaders, the problem solvers, the people who work without needing the spotlight on them. Gen X is the only generation that lived long enough before the internet to remember it, but young enough to keep up with it. This creates a very healthy relationship with technology. For them, technology is a tool, not an identity. They don't crave dopamine from likes or fake validation like newer generations. They don't fear change either, because they still remember clearly what the real world looked like: a world of rude shoes with little pockets for keys, prank calls with no caller ID showing, and freedom from being tracked by any algorithm. Their ability to control digital stimulation is something to admire, because they know real life is out there, not on a screen. Why does Gen X hold so many positions of power but shows it less than others? Simply because their value doesn't come from instant recognition. They occupy the middle layer of power, the people who actually run the systems without needing applause. They were shaped by real ability, by reputation built over decades, by long-term results. In organizational psychology, they're people who work based on effectiveness, not appearance. They still keep that attitude. I do what I believe in. They are skeptical of arrogant authority, but incredibly dedicated to work they trust. They don't need the spotlight on them, because for them, the real reward is the satisfaction of completing something difficult with your own hands. Standing between baby boomers and millennials, Gen X is the psychological glue that holds society together. They are traditional enough to understand discipline, open-minded enough to accept change, and realistic enough to not get lost in fantasy. They are the generation that often had to parent their own parents and be the support for their children. They fix their kids' cars, they explain technology to their parents, they keep every system from falling apart in the chaos of our times. But there's also a paradox. They are the people everyone depends on, but they were raised never to ask for help. A quiet exhaustion builds when they have to carry the world on their shoulders while still not daring to ask for support. Because deep down, they believe that complaining makes them feel weak. Gen X doesn't need to shine to prove their worth. They live with the distinctive belief, I don't need to be seen. As long as everything works, that's enough. In a world that is getting louder and emptier, that is not a weakness. That is a kind of quiet strength we should learn from. They are the last survivors of a time of absolute freedom, people who understand the value of a scar and the honesty of a straight word. Their legacy isn't measured in likes or flashy media moments. It's measured in how steady they stay when the storm comes. The world might not call their name often, but when everything falls apart, people always turn to those who know how to stand on their own feet. Because at the end of the day, Gen X doesn't just survive, they're the ones keeping this world moving. Gen X doesn't need empty praise. But if what you just heard made you feel not too bad, hit like so, the algorithm knows those independent kids from back then are still out here in force. Subscribe if you want to hear more raw truths. And now, just keep doing your thing. Take care.